You're listening to a CNA podcast.
A quick note before we start. There are descriptions of death in this podcast that may be uncomfortable for some people. Listener discretion is advised.
A powerful earthquake rocked Indonesia's Sumatra island this morning, producing a deadly ripple effect. Tsunamis or tidal waves were sent crashing into places as far off as Sri Lanka and India, and closer to Sumatra in Malaysia and southern Thailand. The casualty numbers are horrifying.
By the time the waves retreat, more than 225,000 people are dead. All because a magnitude 9.1 earthquake erupted in the Indian Ocean earlier that morning, unleashing a tsunami that the world has never seen before. In the direct line of the tsunami's fury, the Indonesian province of Aceh is the hardest hit. 167,000 lives are lost here. You are listening to The Waves That Changed Us, Rising from the Asian Tsunami, Part 2 of a special CNA podcast. In Episode 1, we tell the stories of a shared grief, which lives on 20 years later. In this episode, we bring the stories of hope and how entire communities picked up the pieces, little by little, to rebuild their lives. Aceh sits at the northern tip of the island of Sumatra. Population 5 million. It is known for its beautiful beaches, diving sites, and mountain vistas. Its capital, Banda Aceh, bustles with energy, like many of its Southeast Asian neighbors. CNA documentary producer Ikwan Rivai is no stranger to the city.
From the first moment I landed, I was blown away by the scenery, the atmosphere. There was a sense of real, pride in what had been rebuilt in Aceh over the past couple of years.
There are few visible signs that this city was once ravaged by a tsunami. But look carefully, and you can still see the scars. Broken walls and damaged pillars at a local mosque remind visitors of the devastation Aceh endured in 2004. Earlier this year, Ikwan returned to Aceh for the CNA TV documentary, The Waves That Changed Us.
Everyone in Aceh has a tsunami story. There are stories from climbing up a coconut tree and clinging to it, and to running like crazy with their kids and family. One of the first people I met was Delisa, and I spent quite a few days with her going around the city.
My name is Delisa Fitri Rahmadani. I was born in Banda Aceh on December 15th, 1997.
8-year-old Delisa is home with her mother and sister. Her father is working in Jakarta, over 1,000 kilometers away.
It was Sunday and it was the school holidays. I woke up and went outside. I saw my mother hanging the laundry.
Suddenly, the ground begins to shake.
So when the earthquake started, I panicked. Mom! 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 I didn't know what was happening. My mother came in and led me out of the house. When we got to the street, people had already started to gather. We waited there, and it didn't take long before the earthquake stopped.
But without warning, water surges through the streets, swallowing everything in its path.
I looked back and saw the water steadily rising. It was black and the ground was shaking. I was panicking. I looked back briefly and then back to see my sister swept away. When the wave hit me, it felt like being slammed into the road. I became unconscious. When I regained consciousness, I was in a state of shock. I was still in the water and I couldn't feel anything. I called, Mom! 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 But there was no reply.
Nggak ada yang nyaut gitu kan ya.
What Delisa saw next is a scene no 8-year-old should ever witness.
Jadi pas lihat di sebelah ada juga.
When I looked to my side, there was a baby whose head was almost severed. I couldn't lift my hands because something had pinned them down. I felt as if something had crushed my left leg. It was caught in something, but I didn't know what it was because I was still in the water.
Kan di dalam air.
By the time Delisa arrives in the hospital, her foot is rotting.
Pak Didi nanya, Delisa maaf nih nak, dia bilang gitu. Kaki Delisa kan sakit. Ini.
The doctor said, I'm sorry, Delisa, but it doesn't look good for your leg. It needs to be cut off. I said, no, I won't be able to play soccer. Your leg is infected. If we leave it, you will get sick. He tried to convince me and said, if you allow us to cut off your leg, when you recover, I promise to bring you to Jakarta to look for your father. Because he promised to help me find my dad, I agreed.
Oh ya, kita cari ayah gitu.
The hospital is in a state of chaos. No electricity or water. Medical supplies are running low. Delisa must go for the surgery without proper equipment and anesthesia. She will eventually have another 2 amputations, with a final cut just below her knee. Today, she walks with the help of a prosthetic leg. But the trauma of 2004 is still deeply entrenched. In 2012, Delisa was in school when another earthquake hit.
Nah, gempa itu Delisa masih di sekolah. Waktu itu kan les.
We were in class when the earthquake hit. Everyone ran away in a panic. But in my panic, my leg just froze. I just couldn't bring myself to move. A teacher had to come get me. From then on, I realized I can't react like this again if there's another disaster. I need to get over this fear. So I met with people who studied disaster mitigation and the psychology of disasters, and I learned that during a disaster, one cannot panic.
Mulailah dari situ saya belajar. Ternyata
Me freezing could have been a trauma-induced freeze.
yang seperti saya nge-freeze. Bisa jadi nge-freeze ini bawaan trauma.
Indonesia is one of the most earthquake-prone countries in the world, sitting on what experts call the ring of fire. Delisa believes that sharing her experience can be a powerful foil to help others deal with the next tsunami.
Mulanya Delisa masih belum bisa.
Initially, I was reluctant to share, but eventually I thought, what's the point of keeping it all in? I've been able to share my experiences with students from around the world. My friends, colleagues, the people around me would always tell me, you're doing fine. The tsunami was catastrophic, but the pain you feel in your heart will remain an indelible part of our history.
Jadikan sejarah lah untuk kita.
History offers incredible lessons for the present. Earthquake-prone nations like Japan have passed down precious notes of impending signs, what to do when it hits, and how to take cover. Aceh bore the brunt of this tsunami, and it led people to ask, why was it so deadly? And could more lives have been spared?
Kita tidak terlalu merawat ingatan.
We don't commemorate our disasters. We don't have monuments. For example, in Japan, they preserve their history through stones, inscriptions, or monuments. But in Aceh, we don't.
Raihan Lubis is an author who runs a community library in Aceh.
So when the tsunami happened, we had no knowledge at all about disasters.
But a closer look at historical records reveals that tsunamis and natural disasters have been documented as far back as the 17th century. One manuscript in particular, while not scientific, is almost prophetic.
Manuskrip itu mengatakan jika gempa.
The manuscript says that if the earthquake occurs at Duha, then strong water will follow. Duha translates to a time between 8 and 11 a.m. And the phrase strong water will come, which can be translated in today's context as a tsunami. But this knowledge was not passed down to the next generation for various unknown reasons.
Kita tidak terlalu merawat ingatan kita tentang bencana.
For Raihan, the act of passing down that knowledge is the difference between life and death.
Hampir anak-anak yang saya tanya.
When I asked the children who were born after 2004, they have no memory of the tsunami.
Tidak punya memori apapun tentang tsunami.
So many people died in 2004 because they didn't have the knowledge about these natural disasters. That's why I want to preserve the knowledge and transfer the knowledge to them. For what? So they will know how to be well prepared in case of a future natural disaster.
Well prepare seandainya terjadi bencana lagi.
Another thing that took the people of Aceh by surprise was how the disaster offered them a chance at peace. For almost 30 years, Aceh was locked in a bloody battle with no end in sight.
Situasi Aceh masa itu.
The Indonesian government was conducting military operations because it wanted to suppress what they called a separatist movement. This was known as the Free Aceh Movement, and they wanted independence. They wanted a better life because they saw that the Indonesian government was not being fair in how they distributed Aceh's natural resources.
Hasil bumi yang ada di Aceh.
A quick history lesson here. According to scholars, Aceh is known as the first gateway of Islam into the Indonesian archipelago. It was also blessed with rich natural resources such as spices and oil, and its leaders have always fought to prevent exploitation. In 1976, an armed insurgency group was formed to fight for independence. Called the Free Aceh Movement, they took on the Indonesian military forces. Things came to a head in 2003 when martial law was imposed. As a former journalist who moved to Aceh to cover the insurgency, Raihan remembers how movement was restricted and the people of Aceh lived in fear.
Sejak diberlakukannya darurat militer di Aceh pada
Acehese people had different identity cards from the rest of Indonesia. That limited movement in and out of Aceh. There was also a curfew here. Activities were very limited. Travel was limited because you needed to have permits and all that. There was also constant fighting. Many school buildings were burnt down.
But the conflict came to a sudden halt on 26 December 2004. The tsunami wiped out homes, schools, police, and military bases. Weapons and grenades were washed out to sea. In the face of a much bigger enemy, a different alliance formed. After the tsunami, the Free Aceh Movement offered a ceasefire. In August 2005, less than a year after the disaster, the group and the Indonesian government signed the Helsinki Peace Accord, and that laid the foundation for Aceh's reconstruction. Today, the people of Aceh are much more aware and have a better understanding of natural disasters. Another change is also visible, particularly for the women.
Tapi kemudian ketika tsunami,
When the tsunami hit Aceh, it was a catalyst, opening up even greater opportunities for women to occupy public spaces, to fill positions that were usually only filled by men.
diisi oleh para laki-laki.
Raihan's friend Kurata Ayuni, or better known as Tata, is one such example. Tata was 8 years old when the tsunami took both her parents. Today, she runs a cafe called Morning Mama. A female cafe business owner would have been an unusual sight before the tsunami. Tata reminisces with Raihan on how far Aceh has come.
We can see that coffee culture has changed for women. Who are the customers here?
They are mostly females. So when I first opened Morning Mama, people thought this was a cafe for women only. Over the past few months, men have started to come here, but women are still our main customers.
Yeah, since the tsunami, society has opened up. That is one of the effects of the tsunami. Women can do jobs that were previously not allowed. Women can go to a coffee shop and meet friends and also have a career.
CNA producer Ikwan Rivai also noticed this stark change.
I know it sounds very simple, a young lady opening a cafe, but actually it's a huge deal because when I first went to Aceh many years ago, when I went to the coffee shops, you would not see any females in the coffee shops. It's a cultural thing, and females were confined to the home or the markets and that sort of thing, and you would not see females out at night either. It was just not done.
In the past, we probably didn't have much room to maneuver. We were often belittled and looked down upon. So if we had low self-esteem, we couldn't do anything. Many still had the view, oh, women should just stay at home and don't have to work. And if you finished high school, hurry up and get married. But nowadays, if you're already 30 years old and still not married, not many people will question you about it.
For young women like Delisa and Tata, the tsunami not only changed their lives, but also their community. A new world for the generation left behind. More than 1,000 kilometers away, it's the same story in Sri Lanka, where women too had to step up in the wake of the destruction.
We've never experienced a disaster of such scale.
Nianthani Kadirgama is a PhD student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the United States. She's also a member of the Feminist Collective for Economic Justice in Sri Lanka. Nianthani witnessed how the tsunami crippled her country's economy.
The destruction that we saw was unprecedented, and the way the tsunami hit, although it hit the coastal areas, the suffering in the north and the east was particularly pronounced because there was an ongoing conflict in the country.
Like Aceh, Sri Lanka was plagued by decades of political conflict. The Sinhalese Sri Lankan government and the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam, otherwise known as the Tamil Tigers, were locked in battle. This wreaked havoc on the Sri Lankan economy, which for years struggled to grow. When the tsunami struck, over 30,000 lives were lost here, and over 500,000 people displaced. This put an even heavier burden on the country's purse strings.
We saw destruction of assets and people's wealth and the savings they had accumulated over the years, including in terms of land for the coastal community. It was a fishing community, so in terms of boats that they owned, nets, and so on. Yeah. Businesses were destroyed.
But there was a small silver lining.
The tsunami exposed the kind of unrecognized care work that women do in the way when the losses occurred. The other aspect I think that got highlighted was in terms of what happens to women and the roles they play in a context where they lose family members, where women become then the chief earners in the family.
Left to fend for their surviving loved ones, women began taking on more roles in the community, from rebuilding homes to accepting leadership roles at the local and district level.
The disaster pushed more women to come out, and the disaster also made that aspect of women's roles much more visible in the areas where the tsunami occurred.
The aftermath also revealed a troubling statistic. 80% of Sri Lankans who drowned were women and children. Even though they live on an island, most people here have little swimming experience. Sapna Madhurika was only 3 years old when the tsunami happened.
I have never seen tsunami from my eyes, but we have seen it in videos. Lots of Sri Lanka coastal areas were destroyed. Galle was one of the most destroyed area in Sri Lanka. So after this such a disaster, people felt like we have to do something. Our teachers encouraged us to do the swimming because swimming is such an important thing. After that kind of a disaster, we have to learn swimming.
Sapna graduated from the Sri Lanka-Singapore Friendship College, a school for female students aged 13 to 18 years old. A collaboration among the Singapore Red Cross, the Singapore Sinhala Association, and the Sri Lankan government, the college was built as part of the post-tsunami rebuilding efforts. Today, Sapna is studying for her marketing degree.
In our mother's era, they were all about housewives. And they don't know how to enhance their knowledge. In our generation, our girls are also telling that marriage is not the important thing. Our life is the important thing. See, they want to study. They want to educate themselves and they want to win their life. Not to marry and be a housewife like before the tsunami. So that's why I'm telling everything is changed now.
People will continue to write and talk about the Asian tsunami of 2004, about its seismic impact on the world, the number of lives lost, and the immense pain and suffering it caused to those left behind. But in that gap, between devastation and rebuilding, something good starts to grow, where old scores are settled, and when gaps in social and economic development start to narrow. When the people left behind get a chance to rebuild. Slowly, one brick at a time. This episode was written and produced by Junaini Johari, narrated by me, Yasmin Yonkers, edited by Crispina Robert and Tiffany Ang. Our social media editor is Joanne Chan. Sound engineer is Sa Ye Win, and sound mixing by Ken Delbridge. This podcast is adapted from the CNA TV documentary, The Waves That Changed Us, a 4-part series on the 20th anniversary of the Asian tsunami. It is available on the CNA YouTube channel.